Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux in Baltimore. South African President Jacob Zuma will be keeping his job. That's after a vote to impeach the president was defeated on Tuesday. The opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, certainly was not happy about the vote. Take a look at their reaction.
The Constitutional Court judgment stated that the President failed to uphold, defend and respect the Constitution. In the order, they stated that his conduct was inconsistent with the Constitution. But the court did not find a serious violation, as Section 89(1)(a) of the Constitution requires.
The news comes 5 days after the nation's highest court ruled that Zuma had defied the Constitution by using state funds to make home improvements. With the mainstream media focusing on the corruption scandal, we wanted to take a look at how this affects everyday South Africans. Now joining us from Durban, South Africa is our guest, Patrick Bond. He is a professor at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Thanks so much for joining us, Patrick.
Great to be back with you, Jessica. Hi.
So, Patrick, we know the impeachment attempt was connected to this whole personal corruption case, yet we have recently seen South Africa, under the leadership of the African National Congress, the ANC, really embrace austerity through various cuts in social programs. So if I'm understanding this story correctly, is this basically a situation where the political elite are getting richer while everyday South Africans are the ones really feeling the effects of austerity?
Well, that's right. I mean, that's a global story, isn't it? And in South Africa, it's, as usual, most extreme. We've never really had such an interesting time in terms of political economy and the contradictions bubbling to the surface as today. And in fact, the corruption case against President Zuma, he's able to laugh off. He has a particularly kind of cavalier way of dealing with these criticisms. And that involved about $15 million of home improvements on his rural palace here in KwaZulu, the area that he traditionally has come from. And it's part of a sort of general problem. His nephew, Kulabusi Zuma, was named in the Panama Papers. He has a $10 billion, now that's serious money, $10 billion oil find that he was able to negotiate away from an Irish company in the Democratic Republic of the Congo with his uncle Jacob's help about 4 years ago. That's a major scandal that I think the Panama Papers may help us understand a little bit better. But this is part of a general problem where one particular family from India, the Gupta family, has apparently been able to exert such influence on Jacob Zuma that they're able to tell him which cabinet ministers to appoint, including last December, a disastrous attempt to appoint a finance minister who was very close to this family, the Guptas, and that had to be rolled back. And as you saw with the Democratic Alliance and White Capital and the neoliberal faction, they're not happy at all because this is bad for business. So they were able to put enough pressure last December on Jacob Zuma to get a more neoliberal, acceptable finance minister for their interests. And yes, as you say, his agenda, even though he was once a Marxist, he taught me Marxism in 1984 in the Gandhi ashram. Praveen Gordon is his name. But he's cut the social grants that 16.5 million people depend on. It depends on the inflation rate, but it'll probably be about a 5% real cut this year. And that includes also freezes on hiring of public sector workers, confrontations with people all along the chain, including even the last couple of days, university students again, because the fees are still too high. They're still demanding fees must fall, low fees, no fees, indeed, for tertiary education. The tensions are really at a boil.
I hear your criticism about Zuma's austerity policies, but what is South Africa really supposed to do, given the fact that it's experiencing multiple currency crashes? It's about to move to junk grade status on its bonds. So what other options do they have?
Well, let's just continue with that context before thinking about alternatives. You know, it's exactly right. And the January low point of our currency was 17.99 rand to the dollar, just after Goldman Sachs let its traders know that the South African currency would be the second main trading bet of 2016. Now, Goldman Sachs is very involved, as everywhere, in giving good advice to this government. So it's very ironic that the unpatriotic character of its advice and its own financial bets became so obvious in January. The currency's been very volatile, but it was 6.3 to the dollar in 2011 at the high point of that big commodity boom. And really, that's part of the story, isn't it? That the commodity crash, it really began in 2011. It really got bad last year, 2015, prices of major commodities that we export, like coal. The peak was $170 a ton in 2008. It's now around 50. Platinum down about half. Many of our major exports have crashed because of the overproduction at the global scale. Steel is just demolished because the Chinese have overproduced steel and are dumping it here in South Africa. And then you put on top of that, Jessica, the outflow of capital, let's call it illicit financial flows. And the Panama Papers show microscopically how that happens. One big company, the biggest platinum company, Implats, has been named, but Kulabusi Zuma has been very involved in these mining and petroleum sectors, and plenty of others are going to still be named. And we know they have offshore accounts. What's really been disturbing is they take, according to Global Financial Integrity, a Washington NGO, $21 billion a year, a huge amount here, offshore in illicit flows, average for the last 10 years every year, and the government hasn't done anything. Could the government do something? Absolutely. The two words that would really help to solve the problem in the short term are exchange controls. And instead of tightening them and keeping the money in the country, and for example, saying to the big mining houses, no, you've got to keep your profits in the country, not take them to London. That, in fact, has been one of the key aspects of liberalization. The neoliberal agenda is to let the capital flow out fast as you can. That puts more pressure through Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, with a junk bond rating imminent, on the finance minister to cut programs to poor people.
All right, Patrick, I know you made mention of neoliberal elites actually even criticizing Zuma throughout this whole scandal. I want to get your take, sort of like looking into your crystal ball a little bit, about the ANC's future. What do you see as sort of the consequences of this scandal, and how do you think the ANC will fare in the future?
Well, it's so interesting and hard for an outsider to read properly, but there are definitely different factions. And one is the communist faction. Communist Party is allied with the African National Congress, going way back, to the 1950s, with the rump, the leftover of the trade union movement that hasn't already run away. The biggest union, the metal workers, left in 2014. But the Congress of South African Trade Unions, let's call that the center-left. And then the center-right bloc that controls it, with a nationalist and populist element and an ethnic element, with the Zulu people being the strongest, the biggest bloc, keeping Zuma in power, making sure that he doesn't lose these votes in Parliament on impeachment. They're really strong behind him. And they may get his ex-wife, whose name is Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, to take over if they have their way. She's just coming back from the African Union, where she's been the chairperson the last 4 years. The neoliberals, the major bloc, really, in terms of power and their exertion of power over the structure of the economy, the finance ministry, the Reserve Bank, keeping interest rates extremely high, they support Cyril Ramaphosa, the deputy president. And if you may remember, he was the one implicated in emailing in requests to the police to have a very pointed response in Marikana against wildcat strikes against the company Lonmin, in which he was a 9% shareholder, the major black shareholder. So we've got a very messy situation if you look internal to the ANC. External, the left is beginning to find its voice, and we saw a little of that today with the economic freedom fighters in the parliament. We'll probably see more of the metal workers allying with other unions, the mine workers union that broke away, called the AMCU union, and they probably will start an even larger federation at some point. It'll grow as the major left federation of unions starting on May 1. They're going to hold a big march in the center of Johannesburg. So we'll watch that to see if they can gather the forces of aggrieved working class people with communities, with people of faith, NGOs, civil society, that have really given up on an ANC who continue to keep in power a man, Jacob Zuma, and his family, and his friends, the other family, the Guptas, who pretty much everybody knows is now openly unveiled as corrupt.
All right, Patrick Bond joining us from South Africa. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jessica.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.